I'm so excited to be here with all of you and with our amazing panelists that have so much wealth of knowledge to share in the care economy and all of the different innovations that they're working on. We have an hour together, which I know sounds like a lot of time, but really we have a jam-packed hour for you. What we would love to do is this next hour is going to be divided into two parts. One is on the first part, we are going to do a show and tell. So Paige, Annie, and Jay are each respectively going to present, throw up a couple slides, present some of their amazing work that they were doing, bring you a little bit into their worlds. And that will be primarily be presentation based. And then we're going to move into part two of this session, where we're going to go into a moderated Q&A. I have a couple of questions I have for the three of them. And then we're going to open it up to audience Q&A. So if you have any questions that you're burning to ask them, please feel free to throw in chat. And for this whole session, and just to have some sort of like Zoom housekeeping, I'm sure everyone's familiar with Zoom by now, but if you could stay on mute, just to make sure that we can hear all of the panelists like really clearly. So stay on mute. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to throw it in chat, whether it's like, wow, that insight or quote was so amazing, or whether you have a question, feel free to throw it in. The Healthleast team will be mining it. And also we'll be taking a look, and we'll do our best to make sure that if there are questions that we can elevate to the panelists, that we do so. So thank you all. And I also realized that in my excitement of this thing, I didn't introduce myself, but Mary's did. But I'm Jocelyn. I'm a business design partner at the Holding Co., which is a new creative design lab that's out to redesign care in the 21st century. And we got started actually sort of in the beginning of last year when the pandemic hit. And we do a lot of our work in collaboration with IDEO, which is a large global design innovation firm, and Pivotal Ventures, which is Melinda Gates's investment and incubation company. And so the one thing that I want to share just to frame up this whole session, and then I would like to turn it over to Paige, is so when we think about like innovation in general, I know it's a word that we hear a lot. There are many meanings to it. Sometimes you can get really diluted or really blurry of like, what do we actually mean by innovation? But at Healthleast, when we think about innovation in care, we think about it sort of like in three levels. What is core, meaning sort of like innovation that's like optimizing your current product, service, or approach. Adjacent innovation, which is what is something that expands your current business, organization, product, or service. And transformational, like something that's like completely breakthrough, and that is just a new approach or way of thinking, or product or service that you're trying to put out there. And the reason why these three buckets are important is because sometimes when people think about innovation, they tend to only think about it in like tech and robots, or like there has to be some form of innovation that involves some automation or technology, but actually innovation can happen in many different ways, variables, like thinking and approaches. Different combinations of things can also be innovation, and it's important to actually understand the breadth of what it can cover. So with that quick framing of innovation, and without further ado, I am going to hand it over to Paige, and she is going to introduce herself. She is the founder of a really amazing organization called Neighbor Force, and I'll let her tell you all about it. But Paige is going to present what Neighbor Force is about for about the next 10 minutes.
Awesome. Great. Thanks, Jocelyn. I'm going to share my screen, if that's okay. You see it there? Love it when technology works. So yes, I'm the founder of Neighbor Force. We are a platform that connects older adults and their family caregivers to a network of community members for light assistance and social engagement. Up until 3 years ago, I spent my career in corporate finance. like heartless for the furthest thing from what I'm doing today. But like you'll hear from the other founders, I was kind of brought to the space through personal situation in caregiving. And so, you know, we say we're the intersection of technology and community. And Joseph Coughlin, who wrote The Longevity Economy, I actually think he made the whole case for Neighbor Force, but he talks about the fact that these challenges that the country is facing in aging really need to be solved at the community level. And so that's what we're doing. We're harnessing technology to leverage the strength of community to address this growing caregiver shortfall. So backing up 1 second, I'm probably not telling you anything you didn't already know, but it helps to frame it. You know, we talk about the age wave, which is really the proper term, not the silver tsunami, but obviously America's growing older, and I'm the tail end of the baby boomers. So 11,000 of us are turning 65 every day for the next 10 years. And what that means is over the next 30 years, the number of people over 80 is tripling. And when we talk to people, we say, first and foremost, by the way, aging is not a problem. We're all aging from the minute they're born. We're born. When you stop aging, that's kind of a problem. But, you know, the thing about aging is we all want to stay in our homes. We all want to stay connected, and we need help doing that. And so throughout history, that first line of support has come from family. But here's the thing, families are getting smaller, and many people don't peel back the onion to look at this part of what's going on in our country. But today there's 7 family caregivers for every person over 80. And over the next 3 decades, that's dropping to 3 for every person over 80. At the same time, the number is tripling on the older end. And so, you know, one, the sheer number of family caregivers available is diminishing in over half. But if you think about it also in your own family, you know, families are more dispersed. Most people don't live in the same town as their parents. There are more women in the workforce, and obviously the caregiving, sorry guys, mostly falls on the women. You know, statistics will tell you that. Women are having children later. So they're still sandwiched between raising children and helping their older parents. And they're working longer, they're postponing retirement. So all of these things together is really creating, obviously, a big shortfall. You know, how are we going to address this? So right when I quit my job, as I learned all this to come up with a solution, this was the cover of the Wall Street Journal, and it says it perfectly. And by the way, I know this because I lived it. I didn't know at the time I was one of 50 million caregivers helping elderly parents, but my 78-year-old mother broke her hip. And that was just kind of the beginning of her needing lots of little bits of help. She didn't need an aide or a nurse yet. She didn't want that. It was all the little things I say to keep the joy in life. Her name was Joy, and we say we're inspired by Joy all the time. But, you know, whether it was getting her to the beauty parlor or sitting and chatting with her or helping her reprogram the remote, you know, the list is endless. I lived 5 minutes away, but I had a demanding career. I was raising a teenage daughter, and I wanted to be there for her all the time. And I could tell that she didn't want to ask for too much because she didn't want to be a burden. And what I found was there was a giant void of backup or resources to help my mother, or really to help me, until she started needing an aide or a nurse. So, you know, at the time I kept thinking, I need another me. She doesn't need that yet. And so I started looking for a solution. Neighbor Force is that solution. We're providing that other me, and we do it through technology. We are connecting older adults and their family caregivers with people in the community. These are not career caregivers. These are regular people who are seeking purpose in their own lives, a little bit of flexible income, but they like being part of that community ecosystem. It's the perfect answer for that front end of the care continuum. So who are these neighbors? I'll tell you, we've got hundreds of them. The average age is 54, 85% of them are women. They are empty nesters, retirees, school teachers, again, all kinds of folks who love to pop in just a few hours at a time and be kind of that backup son and daughter. You know, what are they doing? Again, we are not home care. We're not even the CNA level, no personal care. It's all those little things that keep people in their home, keep them engaged, lots of companionship. As you can imagine, initially COVID was a huge kick in our gut because we were going in the homes of the most the folks who were at most risk. So we had to stop that in the short run. But what we're seeing now is, gosh, the demand is even bigger than before because fewer people want to move into senior living communities. And while we always talked about connection, we always flipped the script to the positive. So we never talked about loneliness. Now the whole world is really focused on isolation. And we're definitely addressing that. I went very quickly through here. So really, and we can talk about it in Q&A, how we do this. The technology makes it scalable. When I first started the company, I was out in Silicon Valley at this Boomer Venture Summit, and I was listening to these technology pitches, and wow, this was some super high-tech stuff. And I kept thinking, NeighborForce sounds kind of stupid, But then Charlotte Yeh from AARP got up and started talking about the importance of connection. And I thought, you know what? We do need all this technology to help us as we age, but people need people. We're going to continue to need people, at least hopefully in my lifetime. And so, that's what we're seeing in NeighborForce. This is wonderful for the older adults. They're getting the support they need to stay engaged and stay in their home if that's where they want to be. It's a huge resource to family caregivers who can't do it all. And we talk to them about that all the time. But interestingly for us, of the stakeholders, we think that the neighbors get the most out of it. And they are the company. And yes, the technology will allow us to scale, but it's these fabulous neighbors that are every day bringing joy to the lives of our seniors. So thank you. That's NeighborForce in a nutshell.
Thank you so much, Paige. I love NeighborForce as an overall concept. I think that solving for isolation and connection and community is just like so special. And I think that sometimes when we think about care, we only think about it as like someone who is terminally ill, needs like a ton of support, a lot of supervision, but care is a spectrum. Like the fact that NeighborForce is really bringing so much heart into like, let's grab a quick treat together and get some ice cream, or like, let's like reach out to your neighbors is so special. I love NeighborForce. I'm a big fan. So thank you, Paige, so much for bringing us into the NeighborForce world. Next up, we have Jay Newton-Small, who is the CEO of MemoryWell, and our second panelist that's going to be presenting and doing a little show and tell of what her innovation is in the care world. Jay, over to you.
Great, thank you so much, Jocelyn. And can everybody see that? Great. Okay. So MemoryWell is a digital platform for life storytelling with the intent of using the narratives that we collect and the data associated with those narratives to help improve healthcare outcomes. And it really grew out of my experience caregiving from my father, who had Alzheimer's. And a few years ago, I moved him into a community. And when I did, they asked me to fill out this enormous 20-page questionnaire about his life. And I was, my background's in journalism. I spent the last decade at Time Magazine covering everything from, US politics to the Arab Spring. And I was, and I was sitting there struggling to write down the answers to these questions. They had this 20-page questionnaire thinking, I'm a writer and even I couldn't answer these questions well. Like, describe your parents' 40+ year marriage in 4 lines. That's like writing haiku. And B, I didn't really believe that anybody would read and remember 20 pages of handwritten data points for the 100 residents in that community, especially when most of these communities, I'd learned later, experience more than 75% staff turnover annually. And so instead, I handed in the form blank and said, look, I'm a writer. I think it's just easier for me and easier for you if you just let me write down his story. And I did. It was 1 page. I put it up. I kind of plastered the community with it because I wanted them to get to know him, and he couldn't really introduce himself that well anymore. And it really transformed his care. 2 of his caregivers were Ethiopian, and they'd had no idea that my dad had lived in Ethiopia for more than 4 years, early on in his career with the United Nations, and they became his champions. They would sit for hours and ask him what it was like to work with Emperor Haile Selassie and what the Empress was like. And Dad loved it because he remembered Africa still really well at that point from his early 20s, even if he didn't remember last week or last month or last year. So I left my job in early 2017 from Time Magazine to start MemoryWell. And since then, we've built what I would call a curated single-sided marketplace where we match the patients that come to us from hospice and palliative care, from home care. We work with, or starting pilots with our first senior living, with our first insurers and hospital groups, with our a network of more than 700 freelance writers across the country. And basically, the writers will match up with the patients or their families, and they will interview them. The interviews last about half an hour to an hour, and they're really popular. Families, 96% of people love the interview process. It's super cathartic. And they'll talk to them about their lives. They'll write a life story. The stories are brief, so they're really easily approached by busy frontline caregivers in comparison to a lot of the other legacy products out there in the market where, it's usually some version of those DIY questionnaires, whether it's video or audio or digital, that are just really hard to digest by busy frontline caregivers, not like our stories are. And then they'll file the story, and then families can add to them on our digital platform, adding in their loved ones' favorite photos, music, movies, readings. So whomever's sitting with them, whether it's a patient or whether it's, a paid caregiver or a grandchild, they have a whole toolbox of things with which to engage that person. So that's essentially MemoryWell's platform. We've, like Paige, we were in Techstars last year. We were the same cohort together. And we've been really lucky. We've had a great amount of traction so far. We work with about 40 different clients across, or 40 different companies across the states to tell our stories. And we also pull from our stories data. So we collect a lot of social determinants of health information that then we're using AI to analyze. And then at scale, we can become predictive and really begin to see the last 100 times or 300 times or 500 times we saw this intersection of social determinants of health issues, whether it's food or housing or transportation insecurity, as well as issues of health, that we saw these particular outcomes happen. And then we can help patients and their families and providers get ahead of those adverse impacts and really, or even prevent them down the road. So that is MemoryWell. And I like to say we are putting the person into person-centered care. Thanks so much. And I'm super excited to be here today.
Thank you so much, Jay. I love that story of your dad and how he spent time in Ethiopia. I think that as a person who used to work for the UN, also I feel very connected to that story, but I think it also shows like there's just so much incredible power, like when you just understand a person's life and connection and empathy. Like it's related in some ways to what Paige is working on, that when you can create connection, like really magical things happen, like including being able to predict like social determinants of health. So that's really incredible that you're building at MemoryWell. Thank you. And lastly, for our show and tell, but certainly not last, we have Annie from Plus, which is also another organization. I feel like I'm very big fans of the three of you and what you do in terms of your organizations. But Annie is a senior director of business partnerships at Plus, which is paid leave for the United States. And what's really exciting about Plus, as I mentioned before, sort of like in my introduction of how to think about innovation, is that it's innovation in policy and it's innovation in how people come together. And hopefully folks will learn a lot from Annie, and I'd love to turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Jocelyn and everyone. It's a thrill to be here and to connect with you all. I'm going to see if we can do 3 for 3 with the sharing of slides. Give me just a second here. Get this up and running. And I will hit present. And bada bing, bada boom, hey? So, right now in this country, millions of people don't have access to time, to paid time, to take care of themselves or a loved one. So Plus, we say Plus, is an acronym for paid leave for the US. is working. We're an advocacy organization. We're a nonprofit. We're working to change this. We're trying to ensure that everyone in this country has the time that they need to care for themselves and their families when they're needed most. So when we talk about paid leave, what we're talking about is 3 types of leave. The first is parental leave, time to care for a newly arrived child in your family. The second kind is family caregiving leave, which I think is familiar to a lot of folks in this group. This is time to care for a spouse, for a parent, a close family member who needs your time. And the third is personal medical leave, so time to care for one's own serious illness. So these 3 types are fairly universal. Everyone needs time, this kind of paid leave at some point in their lives. And I think most of us need it at different times and in different ways. So that's the work that we're trying to do and the policy that we're trying to achieve. Over this past year, we've seen the need for paid leave and the demand for it grow even greater than it was before. So in our work at Plus, we work with people who are most impacted by leave. And one thing that we've seen in our research and in our work over the years is that the people who need paid leave the most often have the least access. So people who are low income working people, people who are women, people of color often have the least amount of time or are unlikely to have the paid time that they need. This is a fundamental inequity on the issue and the reason that we're working so hard for a federal policy solution, which is to level the playing field and increase access. So this is a picture of a woman named Karen. She works as an independent contractor for a Target delivery service called Shipt. Some people have maybe used Shipt Shoppers. Shipt Shoppers essentially work for Target, but they don't have access to benefits through Target. They are independent contractors and therefore left behind. It's people like Karen that we are fighting with and fighting for. So in our work, we build relationships with people who can become advocates for leave and to share their stories and become the very powerful change makers to ensure that we can win a policy solution. So again, Plus has a singular mission. I like to say that we're a campaign that is an organization. We are fighting to win a comprehensive and permanent paid family and medical leave program. Comprehensive means includes the 3 types of leave that we just talked about, the parental leave, family caregiving leave, and personal medical leave. And that's permanent so that we know that we have this time and everyone in this country has access and can use that time when they need it. So far, since our founding in 2016, we've won expanded paid leave time for over 8 million working people, including new policies at Walmart and Starbucks. And this is the year for the policy win. We have a president who has embraced paid family and medical leave. We have members of Congress who are champions for paid family and medical leave. And the good news and the exciting, nerve-wracking news is that this is the legislative cycle for leave. If we can win, we're going to win it in the next few months. It's a big push for us. So I'll talk a little bit more about what that looks like. This is my favorite slide that Plus has. This is the path to winning. This is what winning paid family and medical leave can and may look like soon this year. So if you look at this first box on the far left, you all may have seen that President Biden had a fair amount of accolades for his rolling out of the American Families Plan back at the end of April. Biden has included the comprehensive and permanent paid leave that we want to see in his proposal. And now we need to rally for it. So at Plus, we are doing everything that we can. I like to say we're throwing everything, including the kitchen sink, at this issue right now. So in my work, I connect with business leaders who are ready to be advocates for paid leave on the Hill. We're doing narrative building advocacy in the media. And we have a very comprehensive legislative strategy. I don't envy that team who is working so hard right now to ensure that members of Congress are indeed ready to prioritize paid family leave. Up next, we're going to see some bill text in the next couple months. And later this fall, fingers and toes crossed, we'll have a bill that we're going to really be working hard to ensure gets passed and signed. That's a lot and a little bit of space. So my last slide here is a little bit more about how to reach me and to reach Plus. This is our website here and my email address. For anyone who is inspired to be a part of this win. And I will close the share and turn it back over to Jocelyn.
Great. Thank you so much, Annie. That was so wonderful. I was just reflecting on when you were sharing about how important it is to have time and to be fighting for that and to making sure that it is paid and people are treated in an equitable way. And I think that's just such an important cause to be fighting for. So thank you so much for the work that Plus does. And also just like in general, sort of like reflecting as the three of you were presenting each of your own innovations and organizations that you're building, like you're solving for time, you're solving for connection, you're solving for isolation, you're solving for like legacy. And I think like all of those things are just so inherently part of the care economy and how we relate to each other. So just a really huge thank you for the three of you for doing what you do. And let's move now into moderated sort of a Q&A. And for the audience members as well, feel free to start reflecting on the question that you might have for the panelists and throw it into the chat so that the Health Leads team can mind that and we can get to that. But before that, I have a couple of questions for the panelists. So as the three of you sort of like reflect on what innovation in care means, and I think sometimes it's easier to understand when you have a really exciting example or an organization that you or solution that's out there in the marketplace that you feel like is doing something incredible. And I would love for you to share outside of your organization and the two others that are here. So let's just put Neighbor First, Memory Well, and Plus like off the table. Like what is one other care solution, approach, organization, campaign that you're really excited about, that you feel like is doing such incredible work? And maybe we start, Paige, with you. And I would love to hear what other org that you feel like is doing some incredible stuff in the field.
Yeah, you know, as Jay mentioned, we both went through the Techstars Future of Longevity Accelerator last year, and that was 10 companies all doing amazing things, mostly around caregiving, one way or the other. I think what we see, I mean, it's funny, what we do touches Jay, touches Annie. And by the way, Annie, you know, I didn't think about it at the time until I started this company. I was so fortunate because I ended up taking 5 weeks of family medical leave when I was going through it with my mother because I was about to crack, you know, and I was so fortunate when I look at it now and see what our clients are dealing with. But, you know, I think all of these things we see, housing is a big issue and support. And so I think there are a lot of companies out there that are addressing that. which I think is really positive. And some of them are doing it multi-generational, you know, like a Silver Nest or somewhere like that. We had another Upside Home in our group that was providing a different kind of living solution for folks as they age. And in that is community. There's another group called Cozy Home Community. I know the guy starting that. And he's almost building neighbor force into the community. So people buy these small homes, groups of 10, and they time bank helping each other. So again, that community-based help. But there's so many issues and there's so many awesome solutions, but that's just one that came to mind.
I love it. Housing and space as a form of creating connection and community. I just threw in Upside Home as a link into the chat because I'm a big fan of those guys as well. So thank you for sharing that page. And speaking of housing, I mean, that's so connected to social determinants of health. I mean, it is like core. Like if you don't have a good roof over your head, like that's it's, you know, a fundamental sort of like basic right that folks should have. Jay, I'm curious about your work, and I think it's just so fascinating how you're using story to understand and connect it to social determinants of health. Any quick reflections on that, and then maybe you could share your favorite innovation in the care space.
Yeah, you know, I think everyone talks about social determinants of health, and it's been such a buzzword in health for like the last 10 years, but it's really been a bit of a square that nobody's been able to circle, or a circle nobody's able to square. I'm never quite sure which goes where there. But and I think it's, you know, it's just because it's really hard to get to root cause. You know that there might be some issue of transportation insecurity or housing insecurity, food insecurity, but trying to figure out what is the root cause there and address it and get ahead of it's always been a real challenge, especially when you're dealing with data that's usually scraped from publicly available sources or questionnaires that people rush to fill out and they don't really want to, or telemarketer callers asking them these questions. And so I think being able to have just a personable conversation with somebody and ask them really simple questions like, you know, hey, tell us about your favorite recipe and your barriers to cooking it, that gets at food insecurity, but also gets you a great story about your family legacy, you know, recipes. I think really for us has been exciting to see how we can get to root cause and potentially really help better target a lot of those interventions down the road and really change the market. But I do think, you know, there's like Paige was saying, there's so many cool like innovations that came out of our class. I think particularly as we are looking at isolation with seniors right now, Paige's solution is really great, but also solutions, things that are like help better connect seniors using technology. So whether it's VR or augmented reality, there's a lot of great, Mind VR is one, Rendeavor is another, Embodied Labs is a lot of training around this that sort of helps people understand those living with dementia or those living with incapacities. But seniors being able to make those connections using technologies, we often, I think, discount a senior's ability to use technology. And in fact, you know, there's so many great solutions out there that can help train them or help answer their questions. There was one in our class that helped train seniors. That was really cool. And so I think that there's just being able to use that to bridge this sort of epidemic of loneliness that I think really predated the pandemic and has been exacerbated by it. Has been really important and really cool to see those innovations flourish at this time.
Awesome. Thank you, Jay. I also threw Embodied Labs into sort of like the chat for everyone to check them out, but they're doing some really incredible stuff in terms of caregiver training and making sure that there is enough supply and the workforce is advancing sort of like in the field of care, which I know is a big thing. And thanks, Paige, for sharing Can Do. They're the ones who are training seniors in terms of getting up to speed on the technology on ramp. And I think they're doing some really exciting stuff too. Annie, over to you in terms of what organization you're or solution in care that you're excited about and you think is doing incredible work.
Yeah, I love this question. I think so much, you know, I come from the world of advocacy and policy, so I think my answer is similarly in line, however that may or may not be helpful to you all. My first thought goes to an amazing organization that we've had the pleasure of collaborating with over the years called United for Respect. They are a grassroots base building organization that is working with the people who work for some of the biggest employers, so Walmart, Amazon, Target, some of the biggest employers in this country, and working with them and building their voices and power to demand policy changes within those companies. So, having a fair and reliable schedule so that you can take time off, or when you're going to have time off so that you can organize your own life, for example, is one of the big issues that they're very focused on, ensuring that low-wage working people have access to reliability. They also do work around fighting for a living wage. They've worked on paid leave with us because fundamentally, again, when you think about access to time being still somewhat of an elite benefit in the absence of federal policy, groups like United for Respect that are really fighting for the ability of low-wage working people to have that time wherever possible is transformative.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Annie. I would love to talk a little bit about cross-sector collaboration, because I think that we have the three of you who are representative of different parts of the care system. And at the Holding Co, we think about care as an interconnected system. Like, you can't solve for one part of it without reflecting on, wait, like, how does care show up at work if we don't solve what's happening in the home, or how, and vice versa. And there's so many different components of it. And I think that's sometimes some of the most like breakthrough innovations like happen when we think in a real true cross-sector way. And this can happen at the individual level. So, Jay, I like to think of yourself like you were a journalist by background, and not necessarily part of the care system, but then you cross disciplines and industries, and you say, wow, like, I think that storytelling has a huge role to play in care, and like, let's think about it in a much more expansive way, and using stories and your background in order to cross that. And I was wondering, like, do either of you have a reflection or unlikely or interesting collaboration, or a collaboration that you would like to see between different sectors or groups? So whether that's public and a private sector collaboration, whether that's cross-disciplinary, would love for you guys to reflect on that. And if anyone wants to go first, what's an unlikely collaboration?
I think two things that I think have been really exciting. One is a group called Care Generation, started by Nihal Satyadev, which is like former head of Youth Against Alzheimer's. And they're trying to get, I think, legislation passed on the state and federal level that would create almost like a care corps that would help pay off student loans if students want to go like work in a nursing home for a couple of years, or go help out, take caring for seniors in some way, whether it's even in-home care for their own sort of family, or whether it's somebody or working in a community. And I think that that's a really interesting sort of movement, or a way of thinking through how intergenerationally we can inspire and help people work in this area. And then secondly, I know that Ai-jen Poo and Anne-Marie Slaughter and those at New America and the National Domestic Workers Alliance and others have worked on an initiative called care.com called Caring Across Generations. And they worked on a lot of their ideas had to do with how do you support these caregivers that are often, especially working in homes that are often unprotected by OSHA laws, aren't necessarily subject to minimum wage laws, things like that. And being able to pass legislation in different states or work with unions to provide benefits as a pooled resource. There's a lot of really, I think, interesting initiatives going on there. And you've seen out of that work, states like Hawaii and Washington become the first states in the union to pass the first bills that that support and pay in-home family caregivers as well as paid caregivers, and sort of address this sort of huge cliff of long-term care that we see coming. So those are just a couple of initiatives that I think are super interesting that have come out of collaborations.
Yeah, I love Caring Across Generations. I think what they're doing is like really exciting. And I think that great examples, Jay, thank you. Paige or Annie, any reflections on this front?
So maybe not unlikely collaborations. I think you threw in there at the end, but you know, for us, obviously, right now we're mostly direct to consumer. And there's a lot of value in that in our go-to-market. But we are beginning to work with, and a couple of places that we're seeing is we're adjacent to home care. So we've got a couple of partnerships where they already have a caregiver shortfall of trained caregivers, and that's only getting worse. So for the little snippets that don't take the training and they're short periods of time, they can't peel a caregiver off for an hour and a half to take Mrs. Smith to the beauty parlor. They're pushing those to us, which is great. So we've kind of created a new workforce of caregivers. Hate to call them caregivers, but they're stepping in. They would probably not go work for Home Instead for 20 or 40 hours a week, but they love to pop in. Our average neighbor works 4 hours a week, 4 to 8 hours, and fill in a lot of those holes. So we're creating it there. We're also working with employers because, you know, Annie talked about it too, but this is a huge issue and only getting larger. And it's not just so much the loss of productivity, which is huge for companies, but, you know, they're trying to look at the whole being of their employees, and the healthcare costs of employees is going through the roof. And it's a lot of it is depression and stress that's causing other kinds of health issues. And so we're a great backup for those guys. Again, when they aren't at the point where they need full-time or professional help. And then some of our clients are probably more modest in income. And I know exactly what it is. And this plays into Annie again. You know, the $25 an hour to have a neighbor take their parent to a doctor's appointment is better than risking losing their job because they don't have the kind of career where they can just pop out for an hour or two. They can't put that at risk. So there are definitely collaborations there, but those are not unexpected. I think they're expected.
I love that. And I think that's just as important as the unexpected ones. And it goes back to what I was mentioning at the beginning of like what kind of innovation and like core and like optimizing for what is there. And home healthcare is one that I feel and I'm seeing sort of like a lot of momentum in the current market. I was just reading the news the other day, like Mayo Clinic and Kaiser just invested in a home healthcare venture, which is really exciting. And I think that there's so much that happens at home. And I think there are a lot of different interesting opportunities for collaboration there. Yeah. Annie, any?
I would just chime in a little just to off something that Paige was saying is that I think that or made it spring for me that I think there's, I think we're at the beginning of something of like a revolution in how like people, like what going to work looks like. There's such a big conversation that, you know, companies are just trying to figure out like how to bring people back to the offices. What does that look like? And I think there's a place where that conversation intersects with the care needs that people have, that working people have. I think things are sort of getting ready to sort of change again substantially for the long term in terms of how employers think about ensuring that people have time to care for themselves or their loved ones, and where they're doing that from is a very interesting sort of debate that I think has been happening and will continue.
Yeah. There are just so many exciting things that are happening in care. And on my end, like when I think about, and this bridges your world a little bit, Annie, from the policy advocacy side to what's happening in the technology world. Like I think about the American Jobs Plan and the American Families Plan, like all of the proposals that are currently on the table by the Biden administration. And even if we looked at American Jobs Plan, like the $400 billion that might be invested into home health care and community-based care, really exciting to track sort of like how all of this will come to bear. So we'll see what happens as it continues to get debated and deliberated upon. And on a similar note, we'd love to reflect, like, you know, care is something that it's, we are, and I love what you said, we are on the edge of a revolution. You could like quote that somewhere. But I think about care also as like, it's an age-old issue, like meaning we've all been part of it, we've been living it. And I think only recently we've been able to name it and really truly recognize the invisible labor that has been going on sort of like in the sector to just actually give it its due. And I'm curious, like, what do you think are some barriers that you feel like has been holding back this space, and why now? Like, why is this the moment? And answer it whatever way that you like, whether it's a barrier or why now. And curious to see what you're seeing sort of like in each of your respective fields. Anyone wants to go?
I think, well, at least for me, a barrier that I've always seen, and I is that there's this stigma of caregiving, right? And that people like somehow are ashamed to talk about it, or they think it's embarrassing to their loved one for whom they're caregiving and they don't want to embarrass them. And especially I think of older generations, you see that a lot. It's just, they don't even think of themselves as caregivers. And I think, the number of times where people have come to me after I've talked about Memory Well and my dad's story, and they've said, almost like whispered, like, oh, I had a similar experience caregiving for my mom or my dad or whatever. And I'm like, you shouldn't feel like you have to whisper these things. And I feel like, and I've always want to encourage people to speak openly about their caregiving experiences, because it isn't, I think, until we speak up and talk about how difficult this is and how hard it can be on families that we're really going to get the resources and needed to sort of address the coming, sort of age wave, as Paige calls it. And I think that that's super important, because this wave is coming, and I think that speaks to the why now.
Yeah, and I would add to that, absolutely. So what we see at NeighborForce is that these family caregivers, one, maybe they want to whisper about it, but they're afraid to ask for help because they think that means that they're not doing their job as a son or daughter or a caregiver. And so we, a little bit of what we're doing is like, we're their therapist. It's okay to ask for help. We all need help. Our parents had help raising us. We loved when the babysitter came, right? We knew that was good for the parents to have their special time, and we loved the neighbors, the babysitters. And so it's the same at NeighborForce. The caregiver needs to fill their cup up. Absolutely. But it's a good thing their parents or their spouse realize it's good for, their loved one, and it's, building that community and additional social connections is a byproduct. But, I think it's the ones that have a hard time asking for help. They think it's means that they've given up, but that's not at all the case.
I think my answer would be similar. I think that this is, caregiving is undervalued. I think it's traditionally women's work, and it's undervalued. And I think that there's, I hope, a sea change happening, right, where, maybe that's because of the shifting demographics, it'll force a sea change in the way that we think about it and talk about it. But I think all of the work that all of these groups and organizations are doing to advocate and to solve for this issue help to, raise up this issue so that we can, stop undervaluing. And, likewise, as we're undergoing this big policy push, I think that this is the moment to acknowledge that care is important. It's needed by people. It's needed in sort of the micro individual family. And it's needed when you're trying to rebuild an economy after a pandemic, for example, when you're thinking about macro. So, fingers crossed.
Yeah, absolutely. And on that point, Annie, there was a recent New York Times article that I was reading about what has been holding sort of like the space back. And the article was highlighting an issue of like how we use language, which I know is sort of like really is in Jay's world, on like the fact that we say that care is priceless and it is the most special thing, but by inherently naming it priceless, like this is like we are giving it a $0. And because we can't value it, then in some ways it's holding the space back, which I thought was a really interesting sort of like call out from sort of like the article in itself. And that maybe it's time for us to actually say, like, this is huge in terms of value. Like, women are dropping out of the workforce because, and this is the economic effects of women dropping out of the workforce, or caregivers, like beyond women, like who have to care for a long-term sort of like parent, a child. And by understanding sort of like the implications that it has on our society, I think that could be sort of like a real moment for us to understand sort of like the impact of care on all of us. Yeah. I'm seeing sort of like a couple of questions come in from the audience, and I would love to turn our time to answering some audience questions. So this first question that I have sort of up here is from an attendee, submitted attendee, and is wondering about disability and care. So wondering about how have you cared for caregivers with disabilities, primarily with invisible disabilities that are held to a different standard? So any innovation that you're seeing that addresses disability, so whether that's the policy standpoint or interesting innovation or work that's being done or considerations that you're doing within your own organization to account for disability. Any reflections on that particular angle or question? Anyone wants to go first?
I'll chime in. I mean, one thing that is often sort of forgotten when we talk about paid leave is like the personal medical leave. And I think to clarify, this is, an aspect of the paid leave work that has been sort of embraced and amplified and championed by, people who work around the rights of disabled people, because it's not necessarily just if you break your leg skiing, having access to leave to, for like a regular appointment, or, if there's something that a person who is differently abled needs in a recurring way, it could be accessed by paid leave. And I think there's a way for sort of baking in policy solutions that are inclusive. This is less talked about, which is true, but is a way that can help address needs that are sort of included in this big universe of needs that we're all seeing so accelerated this past year.
Yeah. And on the note, sort of like on policy, I think about it too, sort of like from beyond sort of like a federal state policy level. Like I would think about it from an employer sort of like standpoint, like what is their stance when they have an employee or a family caregiver, a family member of an employee who has disability, and how does that show up in terms of care benefits and the considerations that they might have towards the individual person. I think that's also really sort of like something that's important to think about. Yeah, Paige or IJ, sort of like any quick reflections on disability?
I don't have anything macro. We definitely serve clients with disabilities. Our motto is a friendly hand when you need it. And so we don't do childcare, but we definitely have anybody that needs a friendly hand. We have to be careful because we're not trained medical people. So whatever we're doing, we're not moving somebody, a safe transfer from a bed to a wheelchair, but we can certainly make a meal, sit and connect and do those grocery shopping either for them or with them, that kind of thing. And so we're seeing an increase in that, which is great. And we're getting ready to work on something with the Veterans Administration that I think we'll see more there as well. And the neighbors love it,
Love it. Great. Thank you so much, Paige. And Paige, while you're sort of like answering something like neighbor first, there was a question that came in on inequity within the business model. And how
tough one. This is the one that keeps me awake at night, by the way, because when we very first started, I talked about making it a 501c3, and the advice I was given was, You know, in order to build a business, that's very tough. Build a business, make it profitable, and then you can translate that. And so it is hard for us because we can't serve everyone in our home market. We're now in 4 markets, but in our home market, we collaborate with the city of Richmond and provide some resources to folks who can't afford it. But we're not really equipped yet, or the size where we can make those determinations on our own. So my personal vision for NeighborForce is to build this company, monetize it in some manner, and take some of that and build a foundation that can help others. And maybe the answer is a number of things, but take this platform and give it to communities to help support themselves. So it's not even just the low income communities that might have trouble. Rural communities, it's very difficult for us to serve those. Just like you see Uber's not in a lot of rural communities, but they need it more. You know, their access to healthcare and all of those things. So that's kind of my personal goal for the equity side. We're not there. I mean, that's a goal.
Work in progress. We're all a work in progress. Awesome. Well, folks, I know we have about 3 minutes left before the session closes. And Allison, your question, I'm going to sort of like tweak it a little bit, but I'm going to turn it into a final question for all of our 3 panelists. If there's one thing that caregivers can do to organize or unite, advocate, what can they do? And maybe we just do sort of like a quick flash round. Maybe Annie, we start with you, whether that's like something that they should be petitioning, signing on to, telling their friends and families to use. Would love for everyone to leave to feel sort of like they can do something to organize, campaign for themselves, activate in this field. And Annie, would you want to quickly go first and give your...
Sure. You can go to paidleave.us. You can join us. The fight is now to win paid leave. We want everyone in. And I'll just second what Jay said, and I put it here in the chat. Caring Across Generations is doing really profound and amazing work. And if you're looking for someone to sort of unite all of the work and the people who are advocating for it, I think they're a great option.
Awesome. Thank you. Paige or Jay, what is one thing that folks should be doing?
I guess I would just go back and echo what Annie just said, and Caring Across Generations is doing awesome work. Just, they're great to support, and they do initiatives in particular states as well as federally. So they've got a lot of different initiatives going on. You should check out their website, which is already in the chat.
Great. Thank you so much, Shay. Paige, bring us home.
Yeah, I'm not sure what to add. This is all great. During COVID, we launched something called the KindnessGram. You can go to kindnessgram.org, which is a little less relevant in some ways. And it was just a little note that you could download and put on your neighbor's stoop because, there are lots of people out there that need help, that are afraid to ask. And you may not know who they are, but so we did that. You might know there's an elderly person around the corner. You don't have their phone number, but you can put this little note out and be a good neighbor and help. I mean, that's all we're doing.
Great. Thank you so much, Paige. Oops, I feel like I got your MailChimp link instead for the KindnessGram instead of the actual KindnessGram. But thank you for all 3. I think those are just like such actionable next steps that folks can do, whether it's just to support your neighbor or to sign up to be part of a larger movement. Hopefully everyone comes away with something that they are able to do. And to quote Annie, we're on the edge of a revolution. Time is now. And on that note, I want to hand it back to Maris, who is going to close us out from Health Leads.
Thank you so much. This was an amazing panel to close out, our innovation track. I truly appreciate the expertise and wisdom from Jay, Annie, Paige, and Jocelyn. And so a huge thank you to you. Just as a reminder, we're going to be taking a 10-minute break. So from 3:50 to 4 Eastern time and 12:50 to 1 Pacific. And please join us at 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific for our closing. Thank you so much and enjoy your day.